Please welcome Mr. Ben Morton.
Well, thank you very much. What a comprehensive introduction. Almost embarrassing. It's great to be in the Hunter again, having grown up in Wyong, just an hour down the road, having come to Maitland probably on too many occasions as a young kid to go to the Maitland markets every month, and I'm assuming I'm told that it's still occurring. And before I get too far into my presentation today, thank you to all of you who run small businesses. It's been a harrowing 12 months or more through COVID, and the strength of the Australian small business community has seen this country through. It has seen people kept into jobs. Stuart, my ministerial colleague, Minister for Small Business, Minister for Workplace, Minister for Training, great to have you here tonight, and also acknowledging the member for Patterson as well here tonight as well. When I'm doing a presentation in relation, and please, if your food is here, do eat. Do not eat for my benefit. When I'm speaking, I think it's always important to lay out a few statistics in relation to where we're at as a country, both on the economic and on the health front. The success of the Australian people in conjunction with the Australian government means that sometimes we forget that the pandemic is raging around the world. In fact, the pandemic of COVID-19 is worse today than it was a year ago. Sadly, 3.5 million people have passed away around the world, and we're seeing about 800,000 new cases each and every day from COVID-19. Sadly, in Australia, we know that we've lost 910 people, and the vast majority of those people in Melbourne, and we know why that occurred. One of the things that the Prime Minister does remind us about is that if you apply the COVID death rate in the OECD countries, so similar or like economies and like democracies, that would have resulted in Australia having 30,000 deaths to COVID. 30,000 deaths. There wouldn't be someone that you wouldn't know who have lost their lives to COVID-19 if that death rate was applied here in Australia. So Australians have much to be proud of for their effort. Australian businesses have much to be proud of for their effort as well. But also Australian governments collectively, and on purpose I talk about governments, not government. Governments working together through National Cabinet, bringing together what are sovereign governments responsible to their citizens, working in a cooperative way to deal with COVID-19. Not always agreeing. In our federation, we don't require them to agree all the time, but also we do expect them to cooperate as well. Closing our country's borders to China, one of the first decisions the Morrison government made, allowed this country to buy time and to get ahead of the outbreak. They were decisions that weren't taken in the UK, they were decisions that weren't taken in the US, and they were decisions that weren't taken in Italy, where we saw the first wave of the coronavirus wipe through those countries as well. On the economic front, we know that the economies of the United Kingdom, France and Italy, their economies contracted by over 8%. We know that Japan and Canada, their economies contracted by about 5%. And the Australian economy contracted just 2.5% here in Australia. Policies like JobKeeper and the increase to JobKeeper, but importantly as small business people, policies like JobKeeper were just so important to keep those small businesses alive, but also to make sure that we could keep those 3.8 million people connected to their jobs. It was a game changer of a policy. Those additional JobKeeper payments, those supplements, supported 1.5 million Australians that were out of work, and 800,000 businesses benefited from the cash flow boost as well. And I had, as the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister, I spent most of last year in Canberra seeing the way those policies were designed, not entirely perfect because we were in a pandemic, but understanding that we were using existing mechanisms to get money in the pockets of businesses quickly. And I reckon that the cash flow boost, where it just turned up, was a great way of supporting businesses. Again, not perfect, but it turned up in your business and you were able to use that to invest into your business and keep your staff going. Unemployment. At the start of COVID, peaked at 15%. We're a government that came to government with a commitment of getting Australians back into jobs. My side of politics believes very strongly that the best form of welfare is a job, and to our great delight from the decisions that we made, there are now more Australians in jobs than there were before we went into this pandemic, and we're still not out of the pandemic just yet. Female workforce participation is at a record 61.8%, higher than it was before we went into COVID. Now, you shouldn't tell stories out of school, and one of the meetings that I was in earlier this year was considering the impact of stopping JobKeeper. And there were campaigns to keep JobKeeper going. And I know some businesses would have preferred JobKeeper going, but when we decided to get into JobKeeper, we knew that there would be issues when it came to an end. We knew that when in a pandemic, there would be issues with people transitioning from jobs that weren't there to new jobs that are created when there's such an economic shock. And so we knew as a government that JobKeeper had to come to an end. It had to finish. And one particular meeting, there was a discussion around 120,000 Australians that were expected to not have a job this was in about February, when JobKeeper came to an end. We took away 40,000 of those people as a result of lockdowns in Victoria. And to see the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, other members of the Expenditure Review Committee agonise about those 80,000 Australians, what industries they were in, what geographical locations they were in, considering we're a population of 25 million people, shows to me the commitment that we had to making sure Australians get back into work, knowing that those people would have to transition to job seeker when JobKeeper came to an end. But what I'm able to report to you today is something that this government is very proud of. That since JobKeeper came to an end, rather than more people going on to job seeker or the goal, we have actually had the reverse happen. 105,000 less people are on job seeker today than were on job seeker when JobKeeper came to an end. So more Australians are getting back into work. And again, thank you to the strength of small businesses that have allowed that to occur. Now, people rightfully talk about debt. Am I concerned about debt? Yes. Is the government concerned about debt? Yes, of course it is. Do you want us to be concerned about debt? Absolutely you do. I tell you what, the government that isn't concerned about debt, the government that willy-nilly gets you into debt, is a government that we've got to be very concerned about. The fact that we are concerned about it, the fact that we make the decisions that we make in order to grow the economy, in order to put people into jobs, should give you great comfort. But in relation to net debt, according to our budget papers, it will rise. It will peak in 2025 before therefore declining. And Australian debt as a ratio to gross domestic product is half of that of the United Kingdom and half that of the United States as well. Not seeking to justify those ratios of debt, but just to point out the fact that as a government we are concerned about it, but we are in the middle of a pandemic. On the health front, it's important to point out that as of the 16th of May, 3,089,000 people have been vaccinated in Australia, have received a vaccination shot. Of those people, 2,007,000 have been vaccinated through the Commonwealth or through the federal government's vaccination program. That is not a statistic, but you would be familiar with if you were paying too much attention to the media, because people are trying to talk down Australia's vaccination program down, not up. I'm very confident that as more and more people get vaccinated, the hesitancy that is there in relation to vaccination will diminish. But this is a pandemic budget. Please don't get me wrong in relation to that front. When the Prime Minister spoke to our party room last week, he suggested that the budget is like a patient. Last year's budget was like a patient in ICU. It was an emergency budget. You were getting triage, you were getting fixed up. But this budget represents a patient that's now in the recovery phase, that's in rehabilitation. And when you're in rehabilitation, when you're in recovery, that takes persistent, difficult, and committed work over many months and years as well. And that's the phase that we see ourselves in. We are seeing in Europe double-dip recessions, and that's why we are providing tax relief to over 10 million Australians in this budget. Low and middle income earners will get up to $1,080 for individuals and $2,160 for couples. Stuart Robert will talk no doubt about our job trainer fund, so I'll leave that to him. We're investing in childcare, but also in very important infrastructure. Now, what's important here in relation to the Hunter? Obviously, we've committed at $1.6 billion of extra funding for the M1 extension to Raymond Terrace, but the work that has got into making sure that we commit to the expansion of the Newcastle Airport is something that we're very proud of. I was here when I had the delight of opening the Newcastle show a little over a year ago, when there's been a strong lobbying effort from the councils, from the Committee for Newcastle and from the wider community. And so the $66 million investment that we're putting into the longer range domestic and international passenger services will be able to land at the Newcastle Airport, but also the additional freight services. When I was at the Gosford Chamber of Commerce on Friday, even people in Gosford understand the benefit to them all the way down there that a very strong, expanded Newcastle Airport that is future-proof will mean for them, not just for the jobs that it creates in construction, but the jobs that will come to the region when we have greater visitation and greater freight that can come from an expanded airport. Now, this has been a very liberal budget, a budget that's been focused on cutting taxes for small business. $20.7 billion worth of taxes cut for small businesses in two measures alone. That is the lifting the instant asset write-off threshold and the extension of the temporary full expensing and the temporary loss carryback measures as well. It's estimated that $20.7 billion worth of tax cuts to small business will support $320 billion of investment for small businesses, supporting small businesses to invest in new equipment to support their expansion and therefore the employment of more Australians. I was pleased to visit a distillery on the weekend, on Friday, with Lucy Wixton and Robertson to talk about additional tax cuts that we've put in place for small brewers and distillers that will actually lift the threshold for the payment of excise as well for alcohol for those businesses. And what was the feedback there? These measures combined will help those businesses expand. They will help those businesses employ more Australians. And importantly, we're going to make life easier for small businesses when they're having fights with the Australian Taxation Office. I'm not sure if that's any of you here tonight, but what we've found is that when the ATO gets a little bit bolshy when it comes to debt recovery actions, we need an independent umpire, and so the AAT will now be empowered to suspend and pause any of those debt recovery actions until those are ordered as well. That's something that we've got very strong feedback from small businesses. My role as the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, I explain it as being, and I'm very careful when I use this language because I've slipped up, like an aggregator of problems. Now, I said aggravator once and I misspoke. What that means is that I'm not the Minister for Health and I'm not the Minister for Home Affairs and I'm not the Minister for Education. I'm an Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister, and so therefore sometimes I'm given responsibility for public policy areas where solutions are drawn from different areas. And the Prime Minister has asked me to lead the government's deregulation agenda. Why? Because making sure that our economy is less regulated or more efficiently regulated is a problem that confronts a variety of different government departments. And so we established a deregulation task force, and part of our initial work, I'll give you a very good example, was work in relation to supporting food exporters. One of the things that we found out was that in supporting food exporters, there were solutions that could be found in agriculture, there were solutions that could be found in home affairs, there were solutions that could be found within the Department of Trade. And so using a central agency of government, we can pull those solutions together. A few budgets ago, one of the first things that we did, which is about to come to fruition and to being in place, is to get rid of an absurd example where if you are a Tasmanian honey producer, as an example, in order to export your honey, you have to have an export certificate. You have to apply on a paper form, and you could fax it or post it or email it as a PDF to the Department of Agriculture office. They would print on one of 17 printers around the country a certificate that you would put on your shipment of honey before you send it overseas. The local office for agriculture for northern Tasmania was Tullamarine in Melbourne. There was a whole workforce of people that were couriering these certificates. I bought a parchment paper, but I got in trouble for doing so. They're only very, very special paper, printed on by very, very special printers. And these certificates were put on shipments of honey and they were sent overseas. And the problem was the certificate sometimes was more valuable than the shipment of honey because it was being able to be used multiple times for counterfeit honey over and over again. And so what was the solution? An investment in digitising that process so we could have e-certificates where producers or exporters could go to office works, they could get their A3 labels, A4, they could print them off with the QR code, and that would be a more secure way, a cheaper way of those businesses being able to make sure that their goods could transit across the border. We had an example where one meat exporting business was spending about $150,000 a year in people just changing incorrectly issued certificates by moving them around, and the delays that meant for their business as well. In this most recent budget, we've committed $134.6 million to further deregulation activities. We estimate that will support a reduction in compliance costs of $430 million a year. Some of the examples, the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme, we're going to reduce the reporting requirements there to digitise some of the reports. We believe that will reduce time taken by about 70%, benefiting those 900 companies that report on 7,500 different sites around the country. We are streamlining digital services in the health sector, reducing the regulatory burden on 400 companies that have to apply for pharmaceutical, medical technology services and medical software. Now, this is where a deregulation agenda can actually deliver better health outcomes because the speed at which we can get new products into the market obviously is a benefit for consumers as well. There's 1,220 small fishing businesses that operate in Commonwealth waters. They have to fill out annual logbooks of their catch. As a Minister for Public Service, we put public servants on their boats to monitor the way in which they count their fish and put them in their logbooks. But through our deregulation agenda, we are partnering with industry to put cameras on those boats at the request of those fishing companies that will allow those cameras to detect the catch as it's reeling in, provide better, more live data to the regulator, and that data allows that business to make better business decisions as well. And so we can both achieve the output and the objective of the regulation, but in a more effective and efficient way. All of you, no doubt, employ people, and so part of our work is also to work with the major software companies to translate in a digital form the award information that you rely upon to pay your staff into those accounting packages as well, to take away that issue of trying to translate modern award information to your software packages. We can work with those software providers to have that data transfer automated from you as well. Now, I had my first negotiation with the Senate crossbench last week. That was an interesting but very rewarding moment for me. There was a very important piece of legislation, the Automatic Mutual Recognition Bill. And I just want to share that with you, particularly those of you that might work in the construction industry or those of you that have occupational licences. Since 1992, there's been a Mutual Recognition Act, which means that if you have an occupational licence, if you're a plumber in New South Wales and you want to go and work in Queensland, you take your certificate, your plumbing certificate, you have to apply using a form to the Queensland regulator, you have to pay your fee, you then have to wait, you then get given a Queensland plumbing licence number. You can't be denied one because the 1992 piece of legislation says that must be recognised. And so, at the request of the Council of Treasurers, which is all the state treasurers combined, and working with National Cabinet, we have introduced a bill which will automate that process, that will treat occupational licences like driver's licences. What it means is if you're a plumber, you just go over and do that work. And while you're over there, you respond to and do your work according to legislation in the state that you're operating. There's very good consumer benefits to this as well. Previously, if you were licensed in 2 different states and you did something dodgy in one, it was difficult for you to lose your licence in the state in which you didn't do the dodgy thing. And so therefore you could avoid compliance actions against you. But disappointingly for me, the reason why I had to do the negotiation with the crossbench, despite PricewaterhouseCoopers in their report saying that this would be a $2.4 billion stimulus to economic activity over 10 years, despite having the support of the Victorian government and the Queensland governments and the Western Australian Labor governments, despite this being on the agenda for National Cabinet and endorsed by National Cabinet, and despite the fact that being able to move people with occupational licences around the country will actually assist them greatly in dealing with disaster recovery for people that need tradies urgently when their house has had a cyclone torn through it, like we've seen in Western Australia, or floods like we've seen on the east coast, or bushfires. We didn't have the support of the Labor Party. In fact, in the House of Representatives, the Labor Party moved an amendment to take out all construction licences out of this bill. I think there was some concern from the Electrical Trades Union that they were responding to. Worse so, in the Senate, there was an amendment put by the Australian Greens to gut this bill, and the Australian Labor Party in the Senate supported that. But I'm pleased that that issue is now behind us. I'm pleased that this bill has passed the Senate with the support of the Senate crossbench, and we've been able to make it easier for those occupational licence holders in order to work around the country in the areas that best suit them. And on that note, I'd just like to say thank you for your support for your employees. Thank you for your support for the Chamber. It's been a very interesting budget. It's been a budget that backs Australians. It's been a budget that backs hard-working, aspirational Australians, but it's a budget that backs businesses that continue to employ Australians. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. And Stuart's going to say a few words to take a few questions as well.